Hey guys, it's 10 Types, and today I'm going to be ranking the top 10 best decks in the standard format right now. And this is in the Sword and Shield through Pokemon Go format. So we got a bunch of really interesting decks here. And I think starting off with the 10th best deck, we got a pretty interesting deck, which is Malamar VMAX paired with Arceus VSTAR. A very solid deck that can just deal a solid amount of damage and disrupt their opponent, especially with things like a Jolteon and Path to the Peak in the deck. So, also combined with Marnie and Roxanne, it's really powerful, and also is pretty immune to those disruption kind of decks itself because it has the barrel engine, which makes it pretty resilient, and it also plays ways of bumping Path with something like Pumpkaboo. So overall, really strong deck, but unfortunately, it can fail to set up sometimes because it doesn't have access to that Italian engine. And also with something like Mew VMAX going down generally, its weakness isn't as good to hit anymore. Moving on to the next deck though, we got Blissey Miltank, which is a really solid deck that can just deal a lot of damage, which is really nice, but it does take a few turns to get going. It is pretty tanky, but you can use things like Sharon's Care and Hyper Potion to heal it, which is pretty nice, but then you lose a lot of energy and lose a lot of turns of work. It also struggles because it doesn't really have much of an engine. And also, there are a lot of ways to hit through the Miltank with stuff like Canceling Cologne and Phoebe seeing a ton of play right now, as well as the Italian engine just being rampant in the meta. So it's a really solid deck, but one that I'd be a bit wary of playing because it's on the down low right now. There's also a lot of counters with things that are immune to basics, like the Flying Pikachu VMAX, most notably. And of course, it also struggles against Miltanks and other decks, and overall just not the best deck right now, but certainly a decent consideration. Next, we got on our list, we have Flying Pikachu VMAX, which is one of the major decks that stops Blissey, but it's not amazing in the meta right now because there isn't something like the Reggies seeing a lot of play, and there also isn't as much Palkia, and when it does face against Palkia, Palkia can certainly win with its turbo build with things like the cross switchers and Echoing Horn and all that stuff, able to get KOs quickly and aggressively. So it's a bit scary for Flying Pikachu with its best matchups kind of not being as prevalent in the meta right now. So it's still decent, but also the fact that there's less Mew means the Crobat VMAX isn't as effective, and the deck's a bit inconsistent all around. So certainly a decent deck, but not quite able to keep up with the current meta. Next, we have Dialga VStar, which is a surprising deck. A deck that's honestly underrated by some, overrated by others, but sits around the mid to bottom half of the top 10 here because its Star Chronos VStar power is a really amazing attack, just allowing it to take multiple turns. But the deck usually takes a lot of turns to set up, probably around 3, which isn't crazy, but it's generally a bit slower than most other decks. And it also only plays a few different attackers, so if your opponent's able to get a hit into the Dialga before you're able to V-Star power, you're just in a really bad situation where your attackers are just going down, and as soon as anything goes wrong, you don't have any backup attackers, and you're kind of just out of the game. So unfortunately, it's a deck that can do a lot, but also a lot can go wrong. That's why it's only in the B tier. But now we're going to be moving on to the A tier decks, and we got Mewtwo V Union, which actually has a few different builds. There's the attacking build, but that's not the best deck right now. It's solid, but it's kind of vulnerable. But the control build is really good because it's so strong against almost every deck in the game, because most decks can't one-shot the Mewtwo V Union or even do a substantial amount of damage, so he'll just be locked out of the game with its healing attack, and it also is able to one-shot V-Stars, which is pretty cool, and just also demolish a board state with a lot of Sobbles if it's in that position. But generally just a very solid control card, and you also have stuff like the Miltank, able to wall off a decent chunk of decks, not a ton, but against a deck like, say, Flying Pikachu or something like Blissey, it's pretty good against, or Dialga, you're able to wall off a substantial portion of the meta. And overall, it's just super solid at countering things, and with a Silene Loop, you can go on forever and recover something like Cook if you need to, in order to make sure your deck is able to infinitely heal, which is amazing. Now, the next deck, going into the top 5 here, we got a deck that's fallen off a bit, but still a very solid deck, and that's Mew VMAX, able to one-shot anything on the first turn of the game, which is just absurd, and even after that, able to dish massive one-shots with Meloetta, and there's less counters to it because it's not as popular, although there still are a number of dark decks that may see some play here or there. But luckily, its weakness isn't that bad. There's less Evolved, but there's still a lot of Path to the Peak, which is just really bad for Mew right now. And it also just isn't amazing trading against stuff like Palkia and Arceus, and even the other decks like Flying Pikachu, Malamar, Dialga, Mewtwo. They can all cause a lot of problems for it, so it can definitely run out of resources to be able to deal with them the entire game. It can also be shut down by a lot of powerful semi-control cards, especially Path right now, and it just doesn't trade super well. But still a very solid deck, one that I'd recommend you play if you have, but not the best of the best right now. Now we're moving on to another really solid deck, and one that doesn't have many bad matchups, and that's Deraldon VMAX paired with Arceus VSTAR. This deck is just amazing because it can do a ton of damage, has no weakness, often forces its opponent to take 8 prizes, and really when you look at any of the matchups and how they're likely to play out, Duraldon's favored in almost all of them. The big problem, though, is that Duraldon cannot set up all the time, so that's pretty brutal, and you'll just lose because you can't get going. And also Path is pretty annoying because then you don't have any engine at all, and normally you just have the one Starbirth to get you by and hopefully set your board state up. But overall, the deck's strong, but when it doesn't set up, which is a bit too common, it falls short. Now we got the third best deck in the game right now, and this is a bit of a controversial one, but I think it's Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX with, there's a ton of different builds, but it can be the straight Inteleon build, the one paired with Palkia, or what's generally the best, the one paired with Arceus, a very solid, consistent deck, but really any Ice Rider builds are very solid because the fact that you can just stick on a choice spell and now you can one-shot Arceus and Palkia, that's just amazing. It can work with Path really well. The issue is that if Arceus sticks on a big charm, that's somewhat problematic, but you can just go ahead and Tool Scrapper that off, so it's really good at dealing with a lot of the best decks. And if you couldn't tell by now, the best two are unsurprisingly Arceus and Palkia, but we'll get to those in a second. But you can just go in with Max Lands to one-shot those and have a really favorable prize trade, and also your first attack right at the High King, as well as things like Arceus and Palkia's attacks are just allowing you to have a really solid board state against decks that you can't one-shot. And you can even play something like Cheryl in combination with the Frostlass to be able to heal, which is a decent build, but overall just a really solid deck. Now, moving to the second best deck in the game, and this is honestly a tier above all the rest, that's Arceus VSTAR paired with Inteleon. Sometimes Radiant Charizard's thrown in there, although that's a bit of a sketchy choice because sometimes you'll just end up with bad hands because of it. But overall, really powerful, one of the best attackers, if not the best attacker in the game. Amazing at powering up all your other Pokemon, specifically other Arceuses. Can be used with Melanie pretty effectively. Also has one of the best abilities in the game, able to search out literally anything, which is just insane. And it can also just do a bunch of pressure. It isn't able to one-shot things, which is really detrimental, and the reason why it's not number one and can struggle sometimes. But luckily you have that access to healing more than almost any other deck in the whole game. The only decks that can match in healing may be stuff like Duraludon and Mew, VMAX, and Mewtwo V Union, but you can apply pressure while healing at the same time, which is just a deadly combination that almost every deck in the game can't handle. However, coming in at number one, no surprise here, and that's Origin Form Palkia VSTAR, able to deal massive damage for only 2 energy, super consistent, solid engine with the Inteleon there, can use Radiant Greninja to great use, can power itself up and also power up a number of techs. We see something like Empoleon V coming in, or Starmie V, and these are just so good. Starmie, a great counter to Arceus, and also the Empoleon, a great counter to that control deck, and any deck that plays the Mew engine. Super able to be teched out for a bunch of different things, and just such a powerful Pokemon, able to one-shot Vs unlike any other deck in the whole game, and super consistently able to play Irida, which is just amazing because you can use Cross Switcher and just get super consistent turns off and play a single battle VIP pass, which is something that not any other deck in the game can say. overall, it's probably the best deck in the game because of its massive damage output and insane consistency. If you have any other thoughts, leave them down in the comments below though. And if you enjoy this style of video, I'd appreciate if you liked and subscribed. And I'm excited to keep bringing more tier lists, possibly of the standard meta or other things, and I'm excited to see you in the next video.